Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue our journey watching The Vow on HBO. As I've been saying on these videos, you want to make sure that you're not being triggered by this material. If you've ever been in a high control relationship of any kind, whether it's a cult or domestic violence, an intimate partner violence relationship, you could watch this and be triggered. Some of your traumas could be triggered. So you want to monitor that or avoid it altogether if you're worried about it. If you're in therapy, talk with your therapist before venturing into these kinds of images and discussions. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Whenever I watch these kinds of things, I always have a lot of things to say. And so let's watch it and see if anything of interest comes out of my face.
There was a particular method they used to help people overcome phobias, an EM.
All right, this is great. So now we're definitely getting into my field, a technique they use to help people with their phobias. All right, let's watch.
The beliefs that we formed when we were small children stay with us. We begin to reevaluate those very early conclusions we came to.
All right. So there's nothing wrong with that. I adhere to that belief system as well, but that's not what I would call anything different than cognitive therapy or schema therapy. Psychodynamic therapy is a little like this too. Narrative therapy is like this as well. Lots of research. It's a science. It's evidence-based. I wouldn't differentiate it and call it this brand new technology that they developed. I'm of two minds when I hear this sort of thing. On one mind, I'm like, you're acting like you invented this. You did not invent this. This is being talked about in every graduate school of psychotherapy. It's in every therapy 101 book, cognitive therapy, narrative therapy, psychodynamic therapy. You're not inventing anything. It's not a unique technology. So on one hand, I'm like, come on, people, you're lying. You're a charlatan. You're copying something that isn't yours and acting like it's yours. On the other hand, I'm thinking, well, why not? It's a useful way to think. It could definitely help a lot of people. Why would I want to get in the way of that?
So I go to the front of the class, and we're sitting opposite each other, like what they call a demo, an EM demo.
What's the first thought you have? If you focus on it, can you bring up an associated memory?
This is right down the middle, cognitive therapy or schema therapy, possibly psychodynamic therapy, again, possibly narrative. There's a lot of overlap there in terms of what they're talking about here. So he wants to work on his panic attacks when he's on the freeway. So what's happening there? Who knows exactly, but from that description, it's possible that what happens, he gets on the freeway and his anxiety goes up. And so the person, the prefect, I think they call her, she asks the question of like, okay, when you think about that, what's an early memory that's associated with that? That's a good beginning. It could be fruitful. It might not be. We'll see. But the hope is that you'll eventually get to some memory, some trauma that the person went through that started the whole ball rolling. For example, you are, 16 years old and you're learning how to drive and your dad is very domineering and he's trying to teach you how to drive on a freeway and you're terrified and you're not driving quite right and your dad just yells at you and you start crying and you pull off the road. And from that day forward, you were always afraid of the freeways, which makes total sense. You were terrified on a freeway. You have all these ideas like, I'm not good at driving on the freeway. I'm not good enough. I deserve to be yelled at. The freeway is associated with bad places. And then every time you get on the freeway, you have this distress response, this traumatic memory response. And it just compounds the memories that freeway equals bad for you. And thus you have the physiological response every time you get on the freeway. And so to go back to the beginning, at least in the way that the person is thinking, can be very helpful. One, it's insight of like, oh, that's maybe where it came from. And it can also rewrite the story. The person as an adult, as a 45-year-old man, can look back at their 16-year-old self and say like, well, when I was 16, I thought I was the problem. But now looking back, my dad was the problem. He was not patient. He was mean. He, didn't need to yell at me that much. I was a learner. He should have been more kind. So I wasn't the problem. My dad was the problem. I have a different narrative of that story, and it releases me to some extent. And I can kind of relax. I've been so uptight about me in the freeway, and now I can be like, you know what? that doesn't make a lot of sense. And the next time you get on the freeway, you kind of have a little bit more confidence and you don't have a bad experience. And then your body learns, hey, maybe the freeway isn't so bad. Totally fine. Cognitive therapy, narrative therapy, schema therapy, to some extent psychodynamic therapy, Gestalt therapy's in there, IFS is kind of in there as well. Lots of therapies that if I showed that technique to someone, they'd be like, oh, that sounds like that therapy. And I'd be like, yeah, you're right. It does sound like all these therapies. To claim that they invented it, I don't know.
But I just remember suddenly, like, all the noise starts to quiet down. And I'm like, what just happened? That's it? She goes, no, that's not it. I mean, this is a science. So next time you're in that situation, you're going to check the results and you're going to report to me.
All right, well, that's a little different than what I was talking about. Again, this is him describing it, and they're showing visuals to inspire us to a certain feel of what he went through. But his narrative of what happened, which again, we just have to take his word for it, as she's asking him, hey, tell me about your early experience related to, or think about the early experience related to. This is also kind of EMDR-ish, kind of trauma therapy-ish a little bit as well, exposure therapy a little bit, obviously. But anyway, asking him, okay, think about an early experience that is associated with that. There's a lot of elements to it that science has proven can be associated with positive outcomes, meaning reduction of panic symptoms in this client. One is that you're asking questions to a client and asking them to tell their story, asking them to reflect on themselves. There's something very curative for a lot of people that they get a space like therapy to think about themselves. And, because we run around all day and no one really asks us how we're really doing. Even people close to us, they don't really ask us, how many times has your spouse or the closest person to you just looked right into your eyes and said, like, how are you? I want to know everything about what's happening for you right now. Not a lot of spouses or any family member or friend is going to do that. Sometimes you have a friend or a spouse like that, and God bless you. But that's not the norm. That's what we need, though, a lot of. We need that very close intimacy. And therapists are trained to do that. At least a lot of therapists are trained to do that. A lot of good therapists will do that. They'll really give you the impression and very much authentically be very interested in you in that moment. There is nothing else in the world. There's just you, and they're asking you. And so that can be a very regulating experience. Again, we are social creatures, and when we feel paid attention to, it relaxes us, it heals us. There's so many things that can happen from that. Not because of some mysticism or some technology, but because we evolved to connect. And when we are disconnected, even though we don't know we're disconnected, there's a lot of things that can happen. Fear, for example. Anyway, so that's one element that we could look at as a possible factor in reducing his panic in future times when he was on the freeway. Another thing is that there is such a thing of hypnotism, which I won't go into that much. There's Milton Erickson, there's suggestion, these kinds of things, brief therapies, strategic therapy. There's a whole discussion I could go into about that. But the idea is that when you help people to relax and you have a certain way of talking to people, you can actually get them to disassociate things. Like, for example, I don't know if this is what happened in this moment, because he kind of described it that way. He was like, I felt something happen to me. And sometimes what that will indicate, it's hard to know, is that as he was being talked to, she said, okay, sit down. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to say these things to you. You kind of go into a state. Sometimes they call it a trance-like state. Not where you're like a zombie and you'll do whatever you're told. That's not scientifically demonstrated. But what it is you're a little bit more suggestible. You're a little bit more open to ideas. And you have this powerful, charismatic person talking to you, Mesmer, Freud, this kind of thing. And they're saying, you know what? Next time, you're not going to be as anxious next time. If you are good at this way of suggestion to people, it doesn't trick people. It's not subliminal, because we are not independent creatures. We are social creatures that depend on other people. And so maybe that's what was happening for him in that moment. Again, not invented by Nexium. A lot of hypnotherapist or Milton Erickson people or other kinds of people would be like, oh, I know what that was. I've studied that, and I do that all the time in my clinical therapy office. So again, two minds. On one hand, these people are charlatans rebranding something that they did not invent and acting like they rebranded it. On the other hand, it's like, well, it helps people. Why should I poo-poo that?
I was on the freeway and I realized, strangely enough, that I was sitting in traffic and I was feeling nothing. And then I asked her questions, when's it going to come back? And she said, what do you mean, when's it going to come back? She says, it can't come back.
So that a therapist would never say, because how would they know that? How would they know? I know for a fact that your anxiety will never come back on the freeway. How in the world could you know that? So that is, not a helpful thing to say. And that is a arrogant understanding of your own powers as a helper, that somehow you can predict the future or something, or be that confident in your tiny technique that it would eliminate any possibility of ever having anxiety again on the freeway. That is, that's interesting. So yeah, there are countless examples going back to the 50s and 60s. Like I said, Milton Erickson, Jay Haley, these people, where they would have very brief therapy sessions with people, sometimes just like 5 minutes, and it would have tremendous outcomes, often regarding anxieties, phobias, this kind of thing. I remember reading one story of Milton Erickson, how this person had these phobias of getting on the train. The patient had been to psychotherapy, had been to psychoanalysis, and nothing had worked. He could not get on this train. He was terrified. He needed to get on the train because the train was the main transportation to go to work. And he goes to Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson listens to him and says, I don't want to hear anymore. The next time you get on the train, go on backwards. And I don't know if this is Milton Erickson. I'm pretty sure it is. Should have looked it up. Anyway, it's one of the brief therapy, strategic therapy people. And it's also possible that it's apocryphal, but this is the report. And I believe that it's possible for this sort of thing to work. He said, all I want you to do is next time you get on the train, don't go forwards, turn around and back up into the train. And the belief is that if you interrupt the problem cycle, the problem pattern in such a way that it can't be repeated the same way again because they're walking on backwards and so it's already different. And the idea that if you suggest to someone this is going to work, that it will. Placebo effects have powerful effects on us. When people believe something is going to work, it is much more likely to work. For example, Mark, he probably had at least some belief that, whoa, I felt like something happened there. It was some kind of physical sensation happened. He interpreted it as his brain rewired, but it also could have just been some kind of euphoria of finally someone listening to him or something. Who knows? But that belief of like, this is going to work and it's always going to work can have a profound effect on people. And so the guy got on the train backwards. He reportedly never had fears again on the train. Again, don't quote me on this story. It was something along these lines. The guy came back and said, you know what? I went to psychoanalysis for many, many sessions. Nothing ever helped. And then I went to you for 2 minutes and you completely cured me. This is amazing. And so there are reports like this. And these people didn't invent it.
When you had the revelation, whatever it was, the missing something that you couldn't see, you felt high. It's like a peak experience.
Right. So this is another thing I was going to say is the appeal of these kinds of programs, I guess therapy included, group therapy, Nexium, Landmark, church, is when you're in a group of people and you're being focused on, particularly as a crowd is watching you, there is something that happens for us physically that can result in elation. The feeling of, like he says, like a peak experience. And we clearly evolved to have this for various reasons. It makes sense that because we're social creatures, we are tribal, we get into groups of about 100 or 50 people. When we're paid attention to, when we get the praise of the tribe, we hunted down the wildebeest and we brought it back and everyone cheered and and our body is designed, or we evolved to respond to that stimulus, and and all these euphoria chemicals go firing, and we're on cloud nine, and it's like a high, and it makes sense that we would evolve that way. And so some of these programs will either stumble upon it or purposely use that. Some cults will use it as well. NXIVM clearly eventually became a cult, or at least part of it did. And they will use it for evil. They will use it to manipulate people and say, look how good you feel right now. I gave this to you. I'm the only one who can give this to you. This program is the only program that can give this to you. I have the magic thing. You need to hand over all your money. You need to separate yourself from your family. You need to join my group. You need to have sex with me 5 times a day. You need to recruit other people to have sex with me. I don't know. I know what happens at NXIVM, but below a destructive cult level, there are certainly organizations that will utilize this for evil, for good, for neutral, and it's a powerful thing. NXIVM is not new in that way. And that's one of the things that I wish we would educate the public, and maybe that's what I can do here. And maybe a lot of you already know this, but the point is that when you sign up for a program, whether it's therapy or NXIVM or Landmark or you go to church or whatever, you should know that there are certain things that programs will utilize to inspire you to feel a certain way. The way a rom-com will have a certain story arc, because the rom-com is designed to manipulate you to cry at the end so that you go, oh my God, I love this movie. I'm going to recommend this to other people. One of the ways that story writers have learned how to make a lot of money is to produce an emotional reaction, a horror movie, a comedy movie, a drama movie, a rom-com. These are all designed to create emotions in humans. By watching humans or animals, we have an emotional response. These kinds of programs are no different. And I would even say, me as a professor, there are certain classes that I teach that are kind of designed to create an emotional experience for the students. But I tell them in advance, I say, this class today is going to have some emotions for you. And I'm going to explain why I'm doing this for you, because I want you to experience what it feels like to do this kind of thing, because you're going to do it to clients in the future. I have an explanation as to why I'm doing it. And I'm also not asking the students to sign up and, buy a book or join my little cult or something. Like, once the class is over, it's over, and that's it. There will be groups that will utilize these things because they're trying to get your money. Now, on one hand, you could say that's evil. They're utilizing emotional techniques to get power and money and influence out of people. Another way to put it is they are accepting money to produce people's most profound experiences they've ever had, not on drugs. And it's a small price to pay to have an elated natural high where everyone is supporting you and you feel like you've broken free of all the past chains in your life. That's probably worth it, right? So, 2 minds. Manipulative, evil thing, useful thing that's worth the money. But my hope is that you, if you're going to sign up for something like this, or you're in the midst of something like this, that you can look at it a little critically.
So you start to have a bunch of peak experiences. You're like, this is the shit. Like, we're not taking drugs. We're not like blindfolded. We're not doing sensory deprivation. We're just having conversations. This is almost sci-fi. This is like beyond what I thought was possible.
Right. So according to him, in his experience, because he's not a therapist, I think, he is saying, it's a sci-fi, man. This is bizarre. Implying that NXIVM, their program, is unique, is a technology way beyond anything else. You can't get it anywhere else. I get worried about organizations or people that believe things like that, because those kinds of notions can result in power and control and lack of options for the customers.
I've arrived at the Federation at 50 years in the future, and they have hacked the human brain.
No, you have not arrived at the future where they have hacked the human brain. You have gone back into the past in 1950 when they developed all these techniques in psychotherapy. That's what happened.
I remember after that first intensive, I was working on a screenplay, which I'd struggled with for a long time. I wrote it in 3.5 weeks, and it was good. I was like, I'm in.
Right. So it worked for him. He had been working on a script. He couldn't do it. He went to the NXIVM thing. It helped him. He could write the script now. Why should I get in the way of that? Why would I want to put that down? So I'm of two minds. If it works, it works. And if it helps people, awesome. I'm so happy for this guy that NXIVM helped him in this way. On the other hand,
I felt like I was getting downloaded a book of knowledge about people, about society, about the world in general. I really felt like I had this secret potion of understanding.
now it makes sense that these lay people do not know that there's a whole tradition in psychotherapy and psychology that is what they are talking about. That NXIVM didn't invent this. Of course, they don't know that. How could they know that? Because psychotherapy is kind of a sectioned off ivory tower thing. It's not usually shared with the rest of the world. One of the reasons why I started this podcast 12 years ago, more than 12 years ago, is because I was observing at my university just so many brilliant people, professors, students, other people, researchers, doing tremendous work, very important work, work that people need to hear about. And it was all insular. The only people that knew about the work were their colleagues or people they dragged to their dissertation presentation. And this is one of the reasons why I started the podcast was maybe I can do my part. Maybe I can talk about research. Maybe I can destigmatize therapy.
It was a unified theory to explain why people do what they do and how to change that. If you can work your disintegration so that you arrive at this
All right, so right away we're seeing a map here. I don't know what they were using this for, but a lot of times the pseudoscientist, meaning that the person who will talk like a scientist, but they're not actually using the scientific method or at least sound scientific practices, they will often have graphs like this where they'll give it some thought and they'll have a philosophy about this thing. But they'll often use these kinds of graphs as a way of making it seem more real to people, more concrete. And a lot of times, I don't know about this one, it is just completely a story that the charismatic person developed. And they will sometimes make wild claims about graphs like this that are not supported by science. I won't go into all the various different technologies out there that do this kind of thing, because I'm guessing I'll alienate a lot of you because there's a lot of them out there that a lot of people believe in and a lot of people find to be useful. So I'm going to restrain myself, but we'll see what this graph means. Maybe they won't explain it, but I'm guessing I'm not going to be very convinced. But who knows? I'll be open.
I think we have quite potent tools, and I think our tools are unique.
Your tools are not unique. I haven't seen the whole thing, of course, but I have seen nothing to indicate that most, if not all, could be precisely mapped onto previous concepts that have been described before. In psychotherapy, there are over 400 accepted theories of psychotherapy. 400. There are so many ideas. There have been so many researchers and so many charismatic people within my field who have spearheaded different ideas and had a lot of success. And there are countless other people who didn't find success because their ideas weren't interesting enough or weren't supported by the science. And so the notion that this guy just randomly came up with something that was completely new is suspect at best. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.